Okay, good morning to everyone. Welcome to our lesson. So today, our lesson, Methods of Teaching Literature, is dedicated to imagination in teaching literature. So totally there should be 38 students, but only 30 of them, or I'm sorry, 31 of them are present. So dear monitors, I ask you to give me the list of the students who are or who will be absent during my lessons. Is it clear to you, dear monitors?
Yes.
Okay. So let's start our lessons then. So before getting down to my lesson, I would like you to give a chance to watch a video on YouTube. The video is very short. It lasts only 4 minutes. So it gives you general information about imagination. So if you are ready, now watch to the video. Watch your video.
Imagination, also called the faculty of imagining, is the creative ability to form images, ideas, and sensations in the mind without direct input from the senses, such as seeing or hearing. Imagination helps make knowledge applicable in solving problems and is fundamental to integrating experience and the learning process. A basic training for imagination is listening to storytelling, narrative, in which the exactness of the chosen words is the fundamental factor to evoke worlds. It is accepted as the innate ability and process of inventing partial or complete personal realms within the mind from elements derived from sense perceptions of the shared world. The term is technically used in psychology for the process of reviving in the mind percepts of objects formerly given in sense perception. Since this use of the term conflicts with that of ordinary language, some psychologists have preferred to describe this process as imaging or imagery, or to speak of it as reproductive, as opposed to productive or constructive imagination. Imagined images are seen with the mind's eye. Imagination can also be expressed through stories such as fairy tales or fantasies. Children often use such narratives and pretend play in order to exercise their imaginations. When children develop fantasy, they play at two levels. First, they use role play to act out what they have developed with their imagination, and at the second level, they play again with their make believe situation by acting as if what they have developed is an actual reality.
Teacher, we can hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, my microphone were turned off. So I was saying that you have right now you have a general information or brief information about imagination and when do we develop imagination. So what is the role of literature in developing our imagination? So right now, let's get down to our lecture then. So, so you can open it from TNG, and you can download it, the lecture from TNG Basement, and you can follow my speech right there. So dear students, right now, let's start our lecture, which is dedicated to imagination in teaching and learning process of literature. So it seems generally and agreed that imagination is a good thing and that it ought to be stimulated and developed in education. Two related obstacles stand in the way of our routinely process of all in our day-to-day life in the learning and teaching process. So the first one is difficult. It is difficult to get a clear grasp on what imagination is. And the second one, whatever it is, it does not seem the kind of things that lends itself to practical methods and techniques that any teacher can easily employ in classroom instruction. So the purpose of our lecture is to try to make a little headway against both of these obstacles. So here, dear students, I want to combine a more articulate on imagination with the normal requirements and constraints of classroom teaching or even learning process. So to come up with some practical help for the teacher who wants to engage, stimulate, and develop students' imaginations. So you know that at the end of this term or of this education subject, you will get a knowledge on teaching literature to students or to pupils. So you will be a bit capable or available to teach a literature with kinds of methods of teaching literature. So that's why the materials that we are studying in our lecture will be very useful to you in your future profession. So when talking with students or even teachers, it is common to hear teachers commended as imaginative. The kinds of things they do in class are frequently to use criteria for imaginativeness unusual and effective. Such teachers show a flexibility of mind that enables them to present a subject in a new, engaging way. So a way that enables students to understand it better and to understand teaching or learning imaginative in the case of proficiency. So given tasks in the process of teaching, frequency with which in informal discussion, imagination, or in any kind of discussions is identified as crucial feature of good teaching. So it is surprising to find it almost totally ignored in research on teaching effectiveness. So this is no doubt in part due to the difficulty dominant research methods having common to give us that imagination would be a great pity if it is virtual absence in empirical research should encourage us to focus on the kinds of behavioral repertoires. So which is prominent in that research and ignore something so obviously central to good teaching as imagination. So there is something in this of the old joke, for example, anecdotes about looking for a lost key on the clean pavement under the bright street lamp because it is easy to see there, even though the key, the keys that we have dropped in the long grass further down the street where there is no light. So even though this lecture may occasionally seem to be a feeling it the how to say the main way through tangles. It is at least, I think, looking in the right place for keys to the effective teaching. So our lecture is not about unusual imaginative students and teachers. Rather, we focus on the characteristics of the typical students, on you, of course, imaginative life and how this can be engaged in learning and how the typical teacher might plan lessons and units to achieve this aim and how the typical curriculum or educational program uh, content of science, social studies, language arts, uh, doesn't matter, and so on, might be shaped also to help achieve the aim of the lesson. So we might reasonably feel worry of such educational programs in preparing such educational programs. Though perhaps we need to say first that a good educational program depends what you mean by imagination, because we don't only teach them, we don't give them only knowledge, but we also give them culture, we also give them uh, uh, skills of thinking, skills of speaking, uh, abilities to demonstrate themselves. So it will be obviously that it is if we think that it is important to cultivate the imagination, but one of the reasons we have some reluctance in agreeing wholehearted with those linguists or scientists who think that it is persisting difficult teaching imagination in the process of teaching literature. Despite, dear students, we will draw on our lecture how to get clear about what imagination is, or about the range of things the world is used to cover. We can begin by observing that people, even those who have been most intimately involved in studying it and promoting its value in education, mean rather different things by the term. So what kind of different things I'm talking about? So I'm talking about varieties in the meanings of imagination, which was brought home to you to a few years ago, or when you were accepted to the university. So when you started to learn English language, when you first started to read uh, literature works, which is written in English language. So from that moment, your imagination process started, or even further in your own native languages. It doesn't matter whether you are Kazakh, Uzbek, and so on. So you have already developed your imagination processes while reading literature works, isn't it, dear students? Do you agree with me? While you are reading literature works, we are used to feel ourselves as a part of that literature books. We get interested in it and we feel how everything happens, how every word is surrounding us, how the situations, how the story goes through us. So can you hear me, dear students?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So while I'm asking a question, please respond me, because it's very important to me to know that you are following me. Okay, let's continue. So we all use the word very confidently. I'm sorry. So more or less what we mean, and that what we mean will be understood by others as what they more or less mean by the word. I think this confidence is not misplaced. That is, we use imagination to refer to a range of capacities we share. There is, I suspect, a fair amount of intuitive agreement about what this range involves once we try to excavate it and categorize it and label the parts. However, we seem to create disagreements, or at least dissatisfaction with the characterizations. The problem seems to lie in the complex and protein nature of imagination, and in the fact that imagination lies at the crux of those aspects of our lives that are least well understood. When we try to describe the imagination, most frequently, they refer to the capacities we have in common to hold images in our minds of what we may not be present or even exist, and sometimes to allow these images to affect us as though they were present and real. The nature of the literature stories or short stories, they create images that is very hard for us to describe, as they are unlike any other kinds of images we are familiar with in the external world. It seems also that people experience these images quite differently. And I think you agree with me, because imagination process, or how we accept different stories, differs in everyone's minds or imagination creation skills. So, as you know, that some of us have clear access to vivid quasi pictorial images, and some of us have such hazy experiences that the word image seems not appropriate. And the same person may be familiar with this range of what seem like different kinds of or degrees of images. So, dear students, imagination lies at a kind of crux where perception, memory, or idea generation, emotion, metaphor, and no doubt other labeled features of our lives intersect and interact. So some of the images we experience seem echoes of what we have perceived, so we can change them, combine them, we can manipulate them to become like nothing we have ever perceived. So our memory seems to be able to transform perceptions and store their echoes in ways that do not always, or perhaps very often, require quasi-pictorial images. So what is quasi-pictorial images? It is the cases of sounds and smells, or the words. So novelty in ideas has nearly always been connected with the powers of imagination. For example, visual imaginations. Mostly visual imaginations accept as a solutions to our problems. Our emotions seem tied to these mental images. When we imagine something, we tend to feel as though it is real or present, such that it seems our coding and access to images, and it is tied in with our emotions. So the logic of imagination seems to conform more uh, readily with that or metaphor than with any scheme of rationality we can be explicit about. Okay. So dear students, if you next time if you turn off your cameras, so don't wait for my warning, you'll be turned off from my lecture. That's why keep switch it on. So most of the observations that was held on the imagination of the literature teaching process is about the imagination which one finds in the literature on the topic tend to draw on the obvious connection between imagination and imagery. So, but we also talk quite properly of imagining reasons, differences, dilemmas, and lies of imaginary wants and happiness of imaginable caution and torment. So, imagining what, why, and how, and of imagining that, for example, we believe so that teaching literature imagination recognizes that our everyday use of this skill refers perhaps most often to the non-pictorial or non-imaginable. So we realize that imagination is not simply a capacity to form images, but is a capacity to think in a particular way. It is a way that crucially involves our capacity and okay, so we have less than 10 minutes. So to think involves our capacity to think of the possible rather than just the actual. So dear students, I tried to give a brief, short information on the range of meanings of imagination, as our current complex concept is in significant part of product of past uses. Now, I will try, as it were, to unroll the senses of imagination that have rolled together through the centuries. So why we need the language that we are going to discuss? What have been done in the centuries that passed through? So to be as explicit about the sense of imagination that we use today with some confidence of being understood of partaking in a shared meaning, we use that more articulate grasp through the rest of the knowledge that we are taking to work on imagination in education. Historical and theoretical chapter seems to appropriate in what is intended as a practice-oriented lecture because of the common imprecisions that has accompanied discussion of imagination in education. I think a more explicit and clearer conception should help one to apply the ideas from the rest of the lecture. But I do recognize that such an introduction might seem unnecessary or redundant to some readers whose primary interest is in the lecture's main practical purpose. So I think you all have a purpose on reading or on listening our lecture, which is dedicated to imagination. So dear students, if you don't follow my rules, no need to join our lecture, because the one who will need the knowledge that I am here giving to you is only you. You will need this message in teaching processes because your future profession is teaching language. I hope. So you need some basis of teaching. So we also, these students, we also will focus on learning. So, you know, through teaching imagination in literature teaching, we do not only teach imagining process, we also learn, and in particular on those characteristics of typical students' imaginations that can be used to aid more meaningful learning. So we try to outline prominent characteristics of students. So listen carefully here. Imaginative lives in order to see how we might design learning activities that engage the imagination. There is very little research to draw on here, and we provide what might rather grandly be called an analysis of ethnographic studies of the materials and activities in which you will be taken, or you will take a part as a most intensive users of the methods of imagination. So, okay, let's go ahead. So, imaginative is intended very briefly to emphasize the usefulness of forming and articulating vivid images in teaching and learning the language. So much educational literature encouraged, no doubt, by the consistent focus on logical mathematical forms, of course, of thinking emphasizes the development and use of concepts that is sometimes seems the educational use of images is often neglected. So, dear students, why did I say that you are the only active users of imaginative methods? Because at the end of this course on TNG basement, you have, of course, your self-individual works. So which in the following weeks, I will change the materials. I will give you a short story, and I will take a survey from you, which is connected with teaching of literature and learning process, of course. And the survey result will be analyzed and be structured in a SWOT analysis. So please keep this in your mind and try to focus on during our lessons because the knowledge that you are taking here is very useful to that SWOT analysis, which I'm going to use in my manuscript writing. So is it clear to you?
Yes.
Yes, we get it.
Okay, thanks a lot, because it's very necessary. So finally, dear students, I will give you examples of how the framework can be used to plan teaching in a variety of curriculum areas. So curriculum here can also be taken as an educational program or educational curriculum. I will try to show how one might use the principles articulated earlier in the lecture to teach in an imaginatively stimulating way. Such topics as the geometrical theorem, as it was given in the 9th grade educational program of our republic. Here in the educational program of our republic, that is conferred with the Ministry of our with the Ministry of Education and Science of our republic. So there are 9 terms. Nine themes, 9 general themes in educational program, which the themes which are taken as a headline of the short stories. So the stories which are taken there is connected with science, with physics, with biology, and environmental, with sociology, with our day-to-day life, with our customs, with our traditions. So these 9 themes will be included to your survey as a main characteristics of the abilities or skills development in pupils' educational programs, which you have soon to identify. And for that reason, as a home task, I'm gonna give you a short home task to prepare. Right now, you may make a note, dear students. You may take a pen, a piece of sheet of paper, and to write down your home task for the next week. Further, you will share among